Hello and welcome to Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. And today I'm at Hokkaido in the town of Yoichi, a very, very remote location, the northern island of the Japanese islands. And here is the Yoichi Whiskey Distillery. It's a very, very old distillery. It was founded by Masataka Taketsuru, the legend amongst the whiskey creators in Japan, because he was the one who went to Scotland in the 19th century with a steamship, and he learned the ways of making Scotch back over in Scotland, and then he brought this knowledge here to Japan, and he really desperately wanted to open a whiskey distillery. So he looked around in Japan, and other companies wanted to open places in Hiroshima or in Sendai or other places, but he looked at Hokkaido, the very remote location in the north, and he saw it's a moist climate, it's a cold climate, you get more than a meter of snow in the winter, and it's very cold, and he thought, oh yeah, this is a bit like Scotland, and this is perfect for making a Scotch. So he started the whiskey business here at the Yoichi River, because the Yoichi River has crisp, clear water, it's soft water, it's clean water, and this is perfect for making whiskey just as in Scotland. And for the Japanese market, it was important to make the perfect whiskey. So he chose the Hokkaido region, even though it's very remote and it was very difficult to set up a business here. What's left of the heritage of Masataka Taketsuru and how they kept on the tradition, we're gonna see today. Behind me is the Malt Mill. It's a roller malt mill, and it is rather new. The malt used in the malt mill comes from Scotland or from the United Kingdom, and they use a rather peaty malt for their whiskey. We're here up in the high north of Hokkaido, and Masataka Taketsuru believed in a very rough and Scottish smoky malt. So they use about 10 to 15 ppm of phenols in there, and that is rather rough for a Japanese whiskey. Behind me is the Mashtun. It's a stainless steel Mashtun, and we can see it is filled. And here in the room, you can really smell that this is a peaty whiskey. And the peat is like a smoky, hammy, malty flavor just lying in the air. Very damp and very warm in here. So what they do is they use the water, heat it up, and they wash out the starch and the sugars from the grist that has just been produced by the malt mill. And what is really, really important is the water. You need soft water, you need clear water, you need good quality water, and that's why they chose this place. This place has water from the Yoichi River, and this is one of the cleanest and one of the freshest in a very, very remote location. So they use the water 3 times. They do a washing to wash out the starches and the sugar, and the third washing obviously has the least amount of starches and sugar inside the water. So they use the third water in the next batch for the first washing, so they can get the maximum amount of sugars and starches out from the grist that has just been milled by the malt mill. Behind me are the fermentation tanks. The wort comes from the mash tun and enters the stainless steel tanks, and then yeast is added, and they ferment about 5 days to produce a whiskey, a beer with about 7 to 8% alcohol. The stainless steel tanks are cooled. This means that the fermentation takes at a temperature of about 20 degrees Celsius. This is very low. So you produce a different type of fermentation and different type of flavors. And this is exactly what the Yoichi Distillery wants to produce to get their style of whiskey that they want to have in the cask later. So I'm now at the still house at Yoichi, and here we can see the wash stills. Yoichi has 4 wash stills, and the very special thing is that they are directly fired. The direct firing means that you have a very, very, very hot heat source. That means you have a very fast distillation. Also, you have a pear shape That means you have a very rough separation of the flavors, and then you have the line arm falling, means that the spirits that are condensed in the line arm don't flow back into the pot, but flow into the condenser. So overall, you get a very strong and a very rough and very spicy flavor. And that's exactly what the people at Yoichi are looking for, what they produce in their stills. The only problem is that you might have something burning or stuck to the bottom. That's why you hear a little squeaking noise. There is a chain going around inside the pot still. It's called the remonger, and that prevents everything from sticking to the bottom or burning to the bottom. So you have a clean pot still that you don't have to wash so often. So now a bit of history. You can see here still number, where is it? There, still number 5. It's a very, very small still, and it's the original still that Masatake Taketsuru used to make his whiskey. The problem back in the time was he only had one still, but he wanted to do double distillation. So he had to use the still the first time as a wash still, and then he had to reuse it as the spirit still and distill the whiskey twice. If you look closely, you see these paper guirlands hanging down. That's the Shinto religion. It's the old Japanese gods, and the sake breweries use these, and it brings you safety and the will to make a good sake, or in this case, a good whiskey. Here I'm standing right in front of the Kiln House, and this was a house used to dry the malted barley. Back in the days, they had the barley here from Japan, and Hokkaido has a swamp, therefore you have peat, and they could cut the peat next to the river, and then they could dry the malted barley which they malted at the malting floors, and then used it in the malt mill to produce the whiskey. Nowadays they don't do it anymore, they import the malt, but it is still workable. So at special festivals or at special events, they can fire up the kiln, produce the malt in the old-fashioned way, and make some whiskey with it. So now I'm here at the warehouses at the Yoichi Distillery, and the warehouses are all dunnage style. This is the first warehouse, so one of the oldest buildings. You only store them 2 barrels high, and it's a natural ground floor. It's a bit sandy because it's near the Yoichi River. The Yoichi Distillery has 26 warehouses, and they're all dunnage style. And the interesting thing is that the Nikka family takes great care about the blending process. So they produce a lot of casks, and the blenders here are very powerful. They demand to be produced this malt, and then in the end they blend the whiskey so they get the perfect flavor that they are looking for. So the style of maturation here is very slow because we are up in the very, very north, and we have a humid climate with a lot of rain and cold winters. You have about 1.5 or even higher amounts of meters of snow here up in Hokkaido, and then the whiskey matures slowly. You have very little angel share, but if you store it for a long enough period of time, let's say 20 years, then you still will end up with about half a barrel that is only half full. So after the blending process, it's up into the bottle and then into our shops around the world for us to be enjoyed. So this was it with the distillery. There's nothing more to see but the weather. The weather is rainy and it's cold, and it's very good for slow maturing whiskey. Behind me is a statue of Masatake Taketsuru, and he is a legend here in Japan. So if you found this video interesting, and please feel free to send this video to a friend who might also like to see how the Yoichi Distillery is made up. And thank you very much for watching.